Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Responsibly Armed Citizen Show, the RAC Show, where we talk about all things responsibly armed citizens should know about. I am one of your hosts, Frank Horvath. Joining with me in studio is Mr. Tim Kelly. Tim, how are you doing on this fine day?
Fantabulous as always.
Fantabulous as always. We have a special show today. We have a special guest. We talked big our last show about him, Mr. David. Forgive me if I pronounce this wrong. Yamane. Yeah, I butchered that. Mr. David Yamane is in the house to talk with us about his perspective and his new book that is out, Gun Curious. David, how are you doing on this fine day?
I'm doing really well. Thanks so much for having me, guys. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Great. Yep. Us too. So, we, us Apache crew, a number of us were able to come out at your book launch. That was last week, I think last Friday, and heard some really cool things. I came in late. I was probably halfway through your talk there, and from what I heard, it was pretty cool. It was a lot of same stuff that read in your book, but I think the piece that I really enjoyed was like the Q&A section. Being able to hear what other people's point of views and be able to go through and talk. But before we get into that, David, let's hear a little bit about you. Give us your who are you? Why are you here? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, sure. Well, the book tells this story at much greater length, so I'll give you the short version. I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, completely outside of the gun world, and traveled most of my life in sort of liberal bastions of sociology and higher education. Managed to avoid guns for most of my life until I moved to North Carolina. Mm-hmm. Started to notice guns all around me. This would include on TV. I was a huge fan of Top Shot, which I stumbled on to completely accidentally and really opened up the world of firearms to me in a way that, I think people don't appreciate the significance that can have for someone who doesn't know anything about guns and then sees people doing cool and safe things with guns. Just started meeting a lot of people in North Carolina who were gun owners, seemed to be normal people, and then had an opportunity to shoot myself when I was 42 years old, mostly to try to figure out how to be safe around guns since everybody seemed to have a gun, and ended up in that day shooting fewer than 50 rounds, but really had a great time and kind of got into this journey personally as a gun owner over the last 12 years, and then also have been studying it as a sociologist over that same period of time. So I really came from completely outside, and now I'm pretty deeply inside and trying to really translate what I've learned in my journey to people who either don't know anything about it, like I didn't, or also to people maybe who've been in it for a long time and forget what it's like not to be in it.
Yeah, that's very cool. So your professional background, so you said you're in sociology?
Yeah, kind of just went straight through, discovered sociology when I was in college back in the 1980s. Went straight from college to graduate school, went from graduate school to teaching sociology at Notre Dame, and then came here in 2005 to Wake Forest. And I was a sociologist of religion to start. The first 20 years of my career, I studied American religion, really, and a lot of Catholicism. And then I had a kind of academic midlife crisis and didn't want to study religion anymore. And I was just getting into guns personally at the time, around 2011, and really began studying gun culture in earnest in 2012. And so this book is about 12 years in the making. That's awesome.
So as far as your journey, right? So in the book you discuss, like I said, the kind of why you started pursuing firearms, why you started really diving into that, looking into that. What how do I say this? You talk about it in your book, the reasons why you really got into guns. What are like your big things? What are like the big ahas that just really stuck out to you over this 12-year journey?
Yeah. Well, the subtitle of the book is Liberal Professor's Surprising Journey Inside American Gun Culture. And, the first surprise really was that I became a gun owner at all. There's nothing in my background that would have suggested this happening. And then, also that I would spend 12 years trying to write a book about it, also surprising. But, probably the biggest surprise outside of my own personal journey is this realization, and I have it as a sort of motto, is that guns are normal and normal people use guns. And for, anybody who's inside gun culture or who works professionally with guns, this is a sort of obvious saying, but to people who are outside of gun culture, as I was for most of my life, it's not something that we hear a lot of. That in part that the idea that plane crashes, that's news, plane lands safely, that's not news. Yeah. We land the plane safely millions of times every day as gun owners, and so that's just not newsworthy. And so that really doesn't get out there. There's a lot of people in the United States who have no direct experience with firearms, or the only direct experience they have are negative. Right? A family member committed suicide, someone got hurt, they live in violence-ravaged communities. And so, I think for those people, the idea that guns are normal is something that is surprising, and I do try to tell the story through the book, through my journey, and through my observations. Why do guns make sense to people who own them? Because for a lot of people, and you kind of get this in the book launch, in the Q&A. There were a couple of questions that I get a lot, kind of along the lines of, I really don't understand why you're doing this, and I think those are important questions for people to ask and important questions that for me to try to answer.
Tim, jump in here.
Yeah, so I'd say the first time that we actually started conversing was back when you took a concealed carry class, actually the one that Frank was teaching, right? And I was curious myself that you're a professor teaching about guns in a college at Wake Forest, that was just something completely new to me. I was totally taken back. And so I watched a YouTube video of you essentially coming out as a liberal professor, and gun owner, and telling your story. And what you just said there is just really surprising to me. It's not a perspective that I had ever really considered, right? I've always seen guns as normal. I've always seen gun owners as normal because that's how I was brought up, right? But I hadn't considered somebody else growing up outside of my community, not having that type of background and experience around firearms, and having a completely different perspective on it. So it was really educating to me. And, I feel like it's kind of like when you run across that new car. Somebody says, "Hey, have you seen the new Camaro?" or something like that. And you're like, "No, I haven't seen it yet." But as soon as you leave here today, you're going to see 6 of them, right? So you're the first person I've met that's really talked about this. So after meeting you, I start stumbling across all kinds of people, who have never been a part of this culture, never experienced some of the things that we've had, the good stuff. And you start running into a lot more people that have had bad interactions with guns, and they have a completely different perspective on it. So, that's something that's really just piqued my interest, especially in regard to your book. And I think it's something that more people really need to be interested in, right? Take interest in.
Yeah, I think that I had really 3 audiences in mind for the book, and one was definitely people who are currently gun owners, but even more so people who are gun curious, as we might say. They're not currently gun owners, but they're not averse to the idea. And then people who are gun skeptics, and trying to explain why do guns make sense to people who own them, to people who are very skeptical about it. So the fact that you, as a lifelong gun owner, found it interesting, that's heartening to me.
Yeah, awesome, man.
You're listening to The Rack Show. We're going to go on a quick break with a conversation with David Yamane. We'll see you guys soon. Welcome back to the Responsible Armed Citizen Show, where we talk about all things responsible armed citizens should know. We're deep conversation with David Yamane in his new book, Gun Curious. We're talking about, the really interesting, like the social aspects, of firearm ownership, and, the normal people have, gun owners are normal people. It's kind of interesting. So last week's show, we kind of talked about, how guns are viewed socially, right? We touched a bit on that. It's interesting now. We're sitting in a room with sociologists. Maybe you can speak a little bit more on this topic, better than we can. So yeah, there's from Tim and I's perspective, we're entrenched in the gun community, right? And from both of us, really, we have, similar, backgrounds as far as we've kind of always been around firearms. We've kind of always been around that. So, coming from, a majority of your life not being involved in the firearms community, and then, just more or less throwing yourself in there, what are some things that you can, say that, are differing from our, points of view, differing from our background, differing something that, we may not have potentially considered before?
Yeah, well, I think that there's a diversity of people within gun culture, right? And so you all are people who work in the field professionally. It's a big part of your lives, but there's a huge range of people and how they relate to firearms. And, I talk a lot about becoming a responsibly armed citizen in my book, and how that was a process, that I wasn't, just because I had a gun didn't mean I was responsibly armed. I talk about how I had a negligent discharge in my apartment when I was taking my gun off one day, that I had a huge amount of the Dunning-Kruger effect of not knowing what I didn't know about what good guns are. And, I wasn't exceptional in that way. There are a lot of people who are gun owners or who are within the gun community who are like that. So we have a huge range of people. And I think one of the things that I learned is that gun culture isn't a single thing. The gun culture is a lot of different things and a lot of different people.
Yeah, I think that, and that's interesting. I read that, and I read about your negligent discharge, and you talked about in the book. And it's crazy is you're not alone. I've talked about it in shows in the past. I had a negligent discharge of my own. Right now, this is many years ago. This is before training or anything like that. Growing up around guns, you think you know what you're doing, very similarly, I was cleaning a firearm in my living room, and I did not follow proper procedure. I didn't have proper procedure set in place, and I had negligent discharge in my living room. Fortunately, no kids, nothing like that. This was, pre all that. But it was definitely terrifying. It was one of the things where I just screwed up. This is a problem. And, I've learned the error of my ways since then. But the crazy part, and the thing that I enjoy most about reading your perspective or really talking to other people, is that there's a lot of people out there who are gun curious, or who are pro Second Amendment or whatever you want to call it. Right? They're very in favor for firearms ownership, in favor for self defense, but politically don't necessarily align with what are the common beliefs that are with surrounded by guns or gun culture or something like that. And the more that I've been a professional trainer, the more that I've talked with people, Tim can vouch for this. We don't care. That thing, at least at Apache, it is a non-issue. It's not something that we actively talk about, not something that we actively bring up or really bring up at all. It just doesn't matter, right? Everyone has a right to self-defense, and but going through those different ideas, going through regardless of the reason why you're looking for some sort of system for self-defense, or regardless of what you want, within reason, that's where it starts getting a little hairy. We're there as a professional company to be able to help train and educate and grow from. So, Tim and I were talking about this, I guess it was sometime last week. We feel like you're almost a unicorn. You're somebody that we can have a conversation with, And, irregardless of what you personally believe, you're stating fact, in this book. And that's, like I said, I just finished this book this morning, and there's just, there's really, aside from two little things I think we'll get into, there's really nothing in the book that I can discount. Like, it's all, it's factual. It's, based from your point of view. It's obvious opinion when it's opinion, right? It's obvious. You're stating fact. You have your source material in there. Like, I cannot discount it at all. And it's really interesting. So, how much work went into finding the source material? How much work went into trying to dig up this factual information that you've included in your book?
Well, I mean, literally 12 years. I have I've kept track, in particular, of the direct observation I've done, particularly of the gun training community. I should have looked at it before I came over. I have almost 1,000 documented hours of either taking training courses or observing training courses over this time period. I'm also, directly engaged with what other scholars in the field are writing. I write and I review work. I read books and I write reviews of those books, and then just being on the ground every day, talking to people who are in the gun community, following it on social media, phone conversations. So a large part of every week for the past 12 years has been involved trying to understand this phenomenon, and hopefully people appreciate the nuance that is in the book. I think this is one of the things that I try to overcome, is this idea that guns are either this or they're that, right? So for people within the gun community, it's oftentimes, guns are the savior. They can do no wrong, that every gun owner is a responsibly armed citizen. And I think that by and large, that's the case, but there are also very irresponsible people who are gun owners. And then on the other side, the idea that guns are always terrible, that nothing good happens with guns. If you take any situation and you add a gun, it makes it worse. Right. And those kind of either ors, I really have come to dislike. And hopefully if anybody reads the book, if anything, they might be like, God dang, would you just take a side, right?
And that's what I was going to ask you. So the purpose of this book is not to pull somebody from one side to the other, correct?
Yeah, and I feel like that's not my responsibility, is to try to convince people one way or the other. You mentioned this gun course that I teach at Wake Forest University. I teach my perspective on guns and gun culture, but I'm not trying to convert people into being gun owners. I'm trying to give them information and a way of thinking about the world that will be helpful to them in making up their own minds.
Right. So how, in terms of the sociology of guns that you teach at Wake Forest, about how many students do you typically see in your classes?
I get, on average, 16 students a semester. I teach it once a year, and I've taught it for 9 years. This fall will be the 10th year, so about 150 students. And
about, do you? I'm sure you keep some kind of numbers on this, but about what's the percentage of people that come into that class that are gun curious, maybe, that actually start becoming more interested in firearms, show more interest in firearms, be it they go out and buy one, or they just, have a better appreciation for or a better respect for firearms?
Yeah. Well, so I know that about 2/3 of the students every semester have almost no experience with firearms. There are, a few of them have some experience, and very rarely do I get a student who's got a lot of experience, maybe 1 or 2 a semester. So these are people who largely are coming from outside of gun culture, as I did, and all of them finish the class with a better appreciation for, the multifaceted reality of guns, I think is the best way to say it. I spent a lot of time talking about the history, the legal frameworks, again, the normality of guns, gun owners, the diversity of gun owners. I do talk about negative outcomes, homicide, suicide, injury, and a little bit about gun politics. But at the end of the semester, people don't really change their fundamental views a lot. I mean, these things are really deeply rooted in our experiences and our intuitions, but there is a softening of the edges. The people who came in sort of strongly anti-gun are more understanding of why other people don't feel the same way, and vice versa. Someone comes in who's, Mr. 2A, he also understands why is it that not everybody's on board with that idea. And then every, once in a while, maybe one or two students a semester will send me a picture later on of they got their concealed carry permit, or they got a firearm. Oftentimes it's women who, they graduate from Wake Forest, they go into professional jobs, typically in bigger cities, and they realize, hey, I'm living alone in Atlanta or in DC. Maybe owning a gun makes sense for me.
Right.
And, so that happens not infrequently.
So how do you find yourself navigating that social landscape of being a gun owner, but primarily being a person who has liberal values and liberal beliefs, and associating with other people who have liberal values and liberal beliefs? I'm sure you've run into some type of turbulence along the way.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not easy because I have one foot in each of these two worlds. I spend a ton of time, with other gun owners. I spend a ton of time with people who are liberal, non-gun owners, and really, many of them truly anti-gun. Not just sort of, we need more regulation, but really dislike guns in a profound way.
Opposed, yeah.
I feel very much at home in these two worlds, but for different reasons. When I'm with gun owners, there are certain things that, don't necessarily make me comfortable outside of the world of guns. And certainly when I'm in my liberal worlds, to see, President Biden, just cannot get off of the assault weapons ban thing. And as a liberal gun owner who owns AR-15, and also as someone who largely sides with Democratic Party on many issues, I just think, can we just drop this? This is like not winning our party or our side any votes. And, it's going to be, close elections in some places, and this is not a winning issue in my view. So a lot of times, when I'm with liberals, I just tend not to talk about guns. We talk about the things that we have in common, and when I'm with gun owners, we tend to talk about guns and not the things that we don't agree on.
Sure.
Right.
Sure.
Right.
But I'm happy to take on those conversations. As you saw at the book launch, there was a diverse crowd there. There was some, easier questions for me to answer. There were some harder questions from gun skeptics, and I'm really happy to talk about those.
Yeah, let's definitely let's dive into that maybe a little bit. Let's see what some of those questions that are out there, and see what some of those hardball questions are, and see if we can't play with those a little bit. You're listening to Responsibly Armed Citizen Show. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Responsibly Armed Citizen Show, where we talk about all things Responsibly Armed Citizens should know. We were deep in conversation, over the break, and the break just hit us, so we are back. Before we forget, if anyone wants to call in, if anybody wants to talk with us, give us your thoughts, right, wrong, and different. Tell us things that we've done well. Tell us things that we don't do. Talk about the things that you want us to talk about, or let us know about the things you want us to talk about. You can do so. You can do that in a couple of different ways. You can give us a call, 336-422-6859. That's 336-422-6859, or at rac@apacheNC.com. That's rac@apacheNC.com. So we're in deep conversation with David Yamane with his book, Gun Curious. That is out in all places where you get books. So everywhere, I guess, but Amazon right now, right? So Amazon's got a little thing going on with your books, but you can still get the digital copy. I did that. I got a digital copy as well as my physical copy for when I'm on the road. But before we had broke from the last section, we had talked briefly about some of those other questions, right? Some of those things that are out there, and we were there. We had heard again, mixed group, diverse group, from different points of view. So what are some of those more, we'll call them hardball questions? What are some of those more burning questions? Those questions that you get asked the most often from your point of view?
Yeah. Well, I'll go ahead and give you the three, and then we can see where that goes. I mean, the first one is really kind of boils down to, why does anybody need an AR-15?
Yep.
Second one would be, why does anybody need to carry a gun to the grocery store to get a gallon of milk? Yep. And the third one is, oh my God, I'm blanking on the third one is, does the government have a right to regulate firearms?
Right.
And so I think, those are two of those three questions came up on Saturday night at the book launch, and the other one is asked, quite routinely.
Yeah. The one about, why do you need a gun to go get a gallon of milk? Right. So that was one of the ones that immediately perked my interest. It's something that's the question that Tim and I have talked about a lot. Cause we get asked that question often, ourselves. If it somehow, some way comes up in conversation that, we're, professional instructors or something like that. They're like, oh, well, do you have a gun on you now? Like, well, I respond to that, and Tim responds to that a little bit differently than a lot of people. We go, well, what color are your underwear? It's a very private, very personal question from my point of view, right? And
that was the first question that you got asked at your book launch.
Are you carrying a gun?
Are you carrying a gun?
Right. Yeah, and as a responsibly armed citizen, if we're doing things the way that we should be doing things, nobody's going to know, right? You're not walking around advertising that you're carrying a gun or anything like that. It's a personal decision. You're going about your day doing what you want to do. But the reasoning that you gave was extremely interesting. It's very similar to something that Tim and I say. So what was your reasoning? You had talked a little bit about fear at the book launch.
Yeah. So, I think that there's, along with that question of why do you need a gun, it's not really a question. It's really just a statement that you don't need a gun to go to the grocery store to get a gallon of milk. And what are you so afraid of? And, so I think that this fear issue really is brought up a lot. And I try to, again, nuance it and say, not just say, I'm not afraid of anything. But, to say, hey, you may be talking about irrational fear, right? If I'm irrationally fearful and I'm carrying a gun, that could lead to some bad outcomes. But if you use fear as a sense, right, in the kind of gift of fear way, that could help keep me safe and actually keep me from ever having to use my gun. Because if I sense a situation is not right, and then I evade that situation or I avoid that situation, that's the ultimate goal, I think, for the armed citizen. It's not, hey, stand your ground, I get to just blast anybody I want to. It's how can I live my life in a way that I enjoy all of the benefits of living life to the fullest, but also not have to worry about encountering a situation that could be deadly for myself or my loved ones. Right. And, to me, that's the heart of the matter, and that I don't expect that if I go to the grocery store to get a gallon of milk that I'll ever need to use a gun, but that's not fully within my control. If we're operating in public space, we don't control that public space.
The way I see it is, who cares? Like, who cares? Why are you so opposed to someone going to the grocery store and carrying a gun? And I think the reason why people are so opposed, or some people are so opposed to that, is because they don't understand just how many people they walk by every day that are carrying guns, because they look like you and me. They're an average Joe going to the grocery store to get their milk and check out, leave. That's it. They're not going there to showboat and, flaunt their gun around or do anything with it. You'd be surprised at just how many people you run across every single day carrying a gun. And that's kind of what was going through. I know I had to be going with what was going through Frank's head, but that's what was going through my mind when the lady asked, like, why on earth would anybody want to carry a gun? And I'm thinking, how many people are here right now carrying a firearm professionally, I would say,
that's how that
responsibly. Right. They're not hurting anyone. They're not bothering anybody, right? I don't see it as a problem from my perspective.
And that's where I think, and I didn't want to sort of get into it in that moment, but that's where I would often say that irrational fear cuts both ways, right? You think someone getting, groceries with a gun is irrationally fearful, but your fear of that person, going to the grocery store to get milk with a gun is an irrational fear also, because, there are a few terrible examples of people who are concealed carriers who do stupid things with their firearms. Right. But given the number of people who are licensed to carry or can carry in a permitless carry state and do, that, as you said, if one of my colleagues once said, I don't want to be in a Starbucks with someone who's got a gun. And I'm like, babe, you already are. Right. It's like, this is a reality. And we hope that we never know who those people are, because if we do, they're either carrying wrong or something has gone very badly.
Sure. Yeah.
And that's one of the things that I also find interesting. Again, playing that same thought experiment of, how many people that are these people who are concerned about whether you have a gun in a grocery store or not. How many other people who maybe have some other challenge that are looking to do harm, right? Are they coming across, potentially, inside that same, span or not? We have no way of guaranteeing. We're not mind readers. We don't know what anybody else in the world's, kind of what's going on, in their head. Not yet, anyway. We got Elon Musk working on that, but there's it's a not zero. It's not zero, right? So the chance that something's going to happen, violence is going to happen towards me or my family, it's non-zero. So I would like to have that spidey sense. I'd like to know whether something or not is going to potentially happen. I want to have every advantage that I can have. And to be honest, gun's not always the answer. Like we've talked about this ad nauseum. You talk about it, some in your book, ECQC, Craig Douglas, and some others. There are so many other means of, active self-protection that just people, the easy target is obviously the guns, right? But there's so many other things that people can use that have nothing at all to do with the gun that you can literally take with you everywhere, right? There's other skill sets, and people just immediately negate that, and they immediately want to go for the gun. It's just, it may just be a gun culture thing, right? Yeah. But it's fascinating. It's fascinating how, almost narrow-minded, some people, narrow-focused, some people get when it comes to self-defense and how that relates to firearms. We got just a couple minutes. I want to get to the thing that I disagreed with. So in your book, all right, there are two things that are near the front. First, which you had mentioned that the Ruger Mark III is a fantastic starter pistol. I disagree. The Mark IV is much better. No, the takedown and being able to clean it, but semantics. But in all seriousness,
speaking of, can you help me get my Mark III back together? Because I took it apart to clean it, and it's still sitting in a box right now.
That is my point exactly. No problem. I'll gladly help you. We just gotta find a witch doctor, maybe some voodoo, a magic bag, all that fun stuff to get that thing back together. But no, having, like I said, that a 22 caliber, a starter pistol, something, right? So all the reasons why you chose that particular pistol, spot on, right? I it's your personal opinion. I have no way of counteracting that aside from maintenance on the Mark IIIs are miserable. But and the other piece, and I think it's just, it's language, right? Words mean things. And I think it's just, with our, in our industry, when I hear a firearm accident or a gun accident, right, I immediately go, was it an accident though? Was it a true accident, right? Or was it negligence? Was it negligence on somebody's part? So anytime I read a firearm accident or something like that, or a gun accident, I would go, but was it real accident? I just kept getting hung up on that word. So what's your point of view on that? Do you believe that there are gun accidents? Do you think that it's negligence? Like where do you sit on that?
Yeah. Well, let me first say thank you for raising concerns, because I've gotten a lot of really positive response toward the book. But unless people tell me the parts that they disagree with, I'm not going to develop it all in my thinking. Yeah. So I take any kind of criticism as part and parcel of the process. The language issue, I think, is really significant. I included a glossary at the front of the book because gun terminology is so hard for people who aren't part of the community, and even now, when I still have to look, and it can be very divisive. We've all been in the, it's not a clip, it's a magazine arguments and those sorts of things. Another one is, people often ask me, well, why are you even talking about gun violence? We're not talking about knife violence and other things. And so, part of my approach is to meet people where they're at And in, my field, people talk about gun violence. If I have an opportunity to talk about it, I often, try to make some subtle distinctions and say like, okay, you're talking about suicide also as gun violence, right? Right. That's different than homicide. That's different than an accidental injury. Right. And to your point, that people do talk about gun accidents, but there are people who want to emphasize the negligence. And hopefully when I talked about my own negligent discharge, I didn't characterize it as an accident, because it was a negligent act on my part. And there are people in the public health community who actually also want to move away from using the language of accidents, because they want to highlight the fact that these things are preventable. Right? If you talk about something as being an accident, it's almost like there's nothing we could have done to stop it. But if you think of it as being, a preventable negative outcome or an act of negligence, then, that does maybe psychologically empower you to say, we need to intervene to make this so it doesn't happen. So the reason I use accident when I do is because that's the language that the people I'm engaging with use. Yeah. And I don't want to kind of spend a lot to like getting into the terminological nuances.
I completely understand. I agree. I absolutely agree with with the language, the way that you use it. We're talking with David Yamane and his book Gun Curious. We're going to go to break and we get to talk about our competency of the month. So we'll be right back.
Welcome back, folks, to the Responsibly Armed Citizen Show, where we talk about everything regarding the responsibly armed citizen. My name is Tim Kelly. With me, I have Frank Horvath and Mr. David Yamane, and we have been talking about his book, Gun Curious, and we've been talking about that different sociology of guns and gun culture, and we've had a great conversation in this show. So now that we are in our last segment, I guess it's appropriate to go ahead and start talking about our competency of the month. So first off, our competency of the month started off as an in-house thing. Like we started this off to like issue a question every month, or a statement rather, to challenge other instructors or apprentices within our cadre on their knowledge on the subject. So it's to encourage them to go out and learn more about it if they don't know a whole lot, or to see how well they speak on the subject and how well they articulate it. And when Frank and I started the show, we thought it'd be a really good idea to just start using that with our audience and challenge our audience to become more educated in the subjects that we're speaking about. So this month's competency is explain the importance of shot placement and the consequences of missing. And David, since you're here, I figured I'd throw the ball in your court and say, hey, what do you think about this? So explain the importance of shot placement and the consequences of missing. Go.
Well, thank you for prepping me that I was going to be put on the spot here. But, I think that my immediate response to this is, and I'm not a gun trainer by any means. I feel like I'm just an average, regular armed citizen. And, so for me, when I think about shot placement in a defensive context, which is what I mostly think about when I'm shooting, it's that I'm responsible for every bullet that comes out of that gun.
100%,
and, so I want to know where that bullet is going to go, whether it needs to go there, and the consequences of, missing it's life or death, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, it's the possibility of killing an innocent person. And that's a, pretty profound responsibility, and it's something that I take pretty seriously, and I do talk about in the book.
I think we oftentimes look at this through one single lens, and most times when people are picturing this and they're picturing the context of shot placement, as you said, they're thinking about the defensive stuff, not at the range and the importance of being able to hit my target and not launch one over the top of the berm or something like that. But since we're on the topic of defensive stuff, you said you took ECQC with Craig Douglas. So again, you have this mental image of shot placement, of putting sights in between your eyes and the target, where you experience something like ECQC, and a lot of your shots are not necessarily aimed with sights. Mm-hmm. but rather contact distance, shooting essentially from the hip or, really a pectoral index, in that positioning, and where that can go wrong just so quick. I actually saw a video. Matter of fact, I think Craig Douglas posted it on his Instagram the other day of a guy who was attacked and just kind of took his gun underneath his arm and shot behind him. And he hit an innocent bystander in the process. Shot placement doesn't always have to do with being able to use your sights. It can be just knowing what is around you and keeping the gun, within your line of sight, I should say.
And the crazy part about, a lot of that, again, we're talking about, the defensive context and all. A lot of people will go to the range, will poke holes in paper without even thinking about what the consequences are. Like, you're going to the range, you're going and you're practicing for a defensive context, God forbid anything were to happen, last resort thing, and they're joking about how they miss their target altogether. And
don't worry about that little guy. Little guy. Don't worry about that little guy.
Like, no, I'm absolutely going to worry about that little guy, because that's a problem, right? That means that is an errant round that has gone somewhere where I did not intend it to go, right? So it's something I need to work on. It's fortunately for us, we're on a safe range. We have a proper backstop and everything like that. But it's definitely something where you need to go, okay, I need to work on that. Teaching concealed carry classes, I cannot get this point across even more so. Just because you get your concealed carry, permit doesn't mean that it's a totem that's going to protect you from everything. You have to put in some work. You have to put in a little bit of practice. You need to be able to, hit your intended target, and far too often. And I've audited a significant number of concealed carry classes, here in North Carolina and around, where a lot of times the instructor will say, all right, stand at the 3-yard line, place, X amount of shots on target, and that is it, right? They're not, not even state minimum standard. They're not following it at all. They're not doing it to the letter of the law. But regardless of that, even in our course, right, it's the North Carolina state minimum standard. It is by no means, right, a comprehensive look of how you operate under stress or how you operate, under an actual defensive context. And that, it's such a dangerous thought for, some of these people to go out and they get their concealed carry, they pass their concealed carry class, and, they go out and get their concealed carry permit, and then it's just, it's, wild, wild west, if you want to call it that, right? Sure. Or they take, a portion of the law out of context and they try to apply it to their own views. And that's hard. That's a hard thing to battle, to struggle with, if that's even my place to battle or to struggle with it.
Right.
Hey, can I say, but I accidentally let my permit expire, so I ended up having to take Frank's concealed carry course. And one of the things I appreciated about it was, and I don't know whether you were consciously teaching it this way, but I had the feeling of like, you're teaching as if this student in your class may never take any gun training again. Yeah. And they need to, whatever you can teach them in those 8 hours, that's what they're going to get. And, obviously you can't require a standard above the state minimum, but we did shoot at targets that were smaller than the state minimum. And, so I definitely appreciated that, and I know that I shot, well enough, but then when, the pressure was amped up towards the end, that I shot a lot worse. And that was a good reminder to me that, it's one thing just to be, shooting at a very easy standard. It's another thing when that stress amps up.
I try to remind folks, again, most of our classes are defensive oriented. It doesn't mean that's all we teach, but, I try to remind folks that it's my family that's going to be in the background of your shooting. That's how I picture it. And that's the seriousness that I put on the table there. And I want them to hold me to the same standard and hold me accountable as well, and say, well, it's my family, that's behind your shooter or your shooting, right? And the background. So I want to make sure that people understand the consequences here are absolutely serious. We've talked a lot about the defensive context of this, but if you just take self-defense out of it and just say plinking, there's a reason why I don't visit a whole lot of public gun ranges anymore.
Or indoor ranges at all.
Right. There are, It's difficult. It is really difficult because there are so many different safety concerns. Guys shooting through the roof or something along those lines. And I'm not saying that that's necessarily negligent behavior, and they're going out there just to showboat and to be nefarious or something like that. A lot of it's just they don't know. They don't know any better. Right. But I try to be in an environment where it's a lot more controlled than that, where we are respective of what is our backstop and what is around it, what's behind it, that type of thing, versus, hey man, here's a gun, there's a shooting lane. You watched the video, right? Cool. Sign the waiver, right? All right. See you later.
Yeah. I think, this is one of the downsides of guns being this political wedge issue, is that gun owners are oftentimes reluctant to call out the bad behavior of other gun owners because they don't want to expose themselves to critique by people who want to regulate guns more and more. Yep. I hear from a lot of people, they don't want to go to a public range, which is indicative of the fact that there are people in the community who are gun owners or interested in becoming gun owners who need, more training, but not mandatory state, training, but, voluntary training that will make everybody better at what they're attempting to do, whether it's recreational and just having fun or defensive.
Right, for sure. We got about 2.5 minutes, David. I don't want to steal your show, but why don't you, is there anything we missed, anything you would really want to talk about?
I think so. I don't think it's this weekend. It's next weekend. You have another book signing at in Mocksville.
Yeah. So Thursday, June 13th, 6:00 at the Davie County Public Library in Mocksville. Some of my most important experiences of becoming a gun owner took place in Mocksville and in Davie County. And so it's going to be very special for me to have a chance to talk to people in that community. It'll be, I think a very different audience than the people who showed up at the book house in Winston-Salem. And then on the 15th, I don't know, I probably don't get this much reach, but on the 15th, I'll be up at City Lights Bookstore in Silva. And so if anybody wants to take a little vacation up to the mountains, you can check me out there. The book is a little bit challenged on Amazon right now, but hopefully they'll be restocked soon. It's also a good opportunity to, request the book at your local bookstore. And, the other thing is not everybody has to buy the book. If you request that your local public library get the book, that a lot of times libraries are very responsive to their patrons. So, that's an option as well.
Fantastic. And where can we find out more information about Gun Curious? I know you have a website out there. What is that? Where can we find more information? How can people reach you?
Yeah, so guncurious.com is the landing page for all things related to the book. If you want to just keep up on my work in general, I'm out there in quite a few different places, but if you go to davidyamane.com or just Google my name, David Yamane, and go to my personal page. I run a virtual book club. We talk about books on guns. I had a 7-week public webinar about guns that kind of mimicked what I do at Wake Forest. And I really, my goal is just to educate people as much as possible and bring light to the issue of guns, because there's so much heat and there's so much darkness, and I just try to counter that.
Awesome. David, we genuinely appreciate you coming on the show with us today. It's been an awesome time. Everyone that's out there, please go get that book, Gun Curious. It is a fantastic book. There's a lot of really good information in there, a lot of perspective, a lot of different points of view. So with that, Tim, you got anything?
I ain't got anything, man.
Got anything? All right. Well, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for listening to the Responsible Citizen Show, the Rec Show, and we will see you next week. Stay safe.